diversity, equity, and inclusion rules for college teaching that mean on the junior college level and even some of the universities, you have to incorporate DEI into everything you're doing. A bunch of faculty are suing, as one community college chemistry professor put it, how exactly do I put DEI in the chemical formula for boron? It doesn't work, right? This is just laughable.
So professors work in colleges to ask big questions, but are they allowed to ask those questions? We're going to find out, but first subscribe and like our channel, click that little bell icon for notifications, and find the Devil's Advocate podcast on your favorite listening app. From the University of Arkansas, Bob Maranto, what exactly is this term free inquiry?
It overlaps a lot with free speech, but they're a little different. Free inquiry means you get to study a wide range of subjects using a wide range of methods and don't self-censor in terms of what you do and what you find. And unfortunately, we're losing that in universities pretty rapidly.
I understand this from the student's point of view, and I hear it all the time. I've heard it from my daughter. I've seen it in high school when she was there, that she can't say things that she wants to say because, Dad, I need to pass this class, so I'm not going to say that. Are we talking about students, or are we talking about researchers when we're talking about the term inquiry?
Inquiry, mostly researchers. Students are generally not doing research. They're doing whatever it is they're doing.
They're drinking.
So yeah, a lot of times, yeah. So this is more focused on researchers. I also think that, generally speaking, most professors are not going to downgrade students for opinions they don't like. There are exceptions, of course.
I'm so going to disagree with you. When you have schools like the Colorado State University that has speech codes that says you can't use this language, you can't use that language, you have to take this class, you can't take that class, it chills all free speech, and it's particularly in a place where students should be free to question and use their voices. I find it so wild that the free speech movement started on college campuses and it's ending on college campuses.
That is very, very sad. And I think multiple things have happened. One is the nature of people, right? When people get power, they want to censor. The last 30 years, 40 years, academia has been run essentially by the left. Some places more than others, but it's been run by the left. And like anybody, people on the left, when they get enough power, they want to censor people they disagree with. And that's really unfortunate. The other thing that's happened, two other things have happened. One is the huge spread of critical theory, of the belief in repressive tolerance, in particular, the idea that there's no such thing as free speech. We have to guide speech, which is a terrible idea.
To guide speech so as to, and I'll see if I got this right, even the scales of injustice, to make sure that those who were oppressed are now counterbalanced, and therefore we're going to say things a certain way, not the other way.
That was the Herbert Marcuse approach, and when you dig into it, it's oh well, who should be allowed to speak and who shouldn't? Well, people who agree with Herbert Marcuse should be allowed to speak.
Who's Herbert Marcuse?
A Marxist theorist in the mid-20th century, was at Stanford for many years. Had a huge influence in the New Left, unfortunately. I think it's one of those intellectuals best left buried, but he's there. Paulo Freire also had a huge influence. I'm not necessarily a Chris Rufo fan, but I actually thought his American Revolution book did a good job covering Freire pretty fairly. Freire is I think, the third most cited figure in the social sciences now, the most cited in education, I think the seventh most assigned author in ed courses, education courses. And Freire was a brilliant guy in a lot of ways.
Freire is...
I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. A Brazilian Marxist theorist, brilliant guy in many ways, but his prescriptions have been utterly disastrous unless you think that Venezuela and Cuba are success stories. So I don't think we should be embracing this view. It's not a view friendly to free speech.
Help me just kind of get my hands around this. So I have this image that if I'm a researcher and and let's just say sciences. I'm in the sciences, and I'm studying climate or something else. And I'm thinking, I think this is worth researching. Are you telling me that there's forces saying, no, don't ask that question, ask only this question, or do something that we feel is better? I've never heard that research is being canceled the way that speakers are being canceled and the way that books are being canceled and celebrities are being canceled. Are you telling me that college academics are also getting canceled?
Yes, in multiple ways. And one way is upstream, and this got very little attention. I don't agree with some of what the Trump administration is doing now, but prior Democratic administrations sort of gave him an opening. The Biden administration politicized $90 billion in annual science funding by saying that you had to incorporate diversity and equity and inclusion principles in it. And in fact, often urging you to hire DEI consultants, which was basically just a spoil system for the wokest Democrats. But it also restricted the questions you could ask quite a bit. That has been written on very little.
Who could ask whom?
Who could ask what questions? So Zana Krylov and Robert George put it a year ago in their Chronicle of Higher Education piece on this. What's more important, that we cure a form of cancer, or that the teams doing the studies equally represent LGBTQ plus people?
All right, so let me see if I'm following you.
Right.
Again, we're talking science. We're not talking political science. We're not talking philosophy. We're not talking oppression. We're talking, I'm a guy, I think this might be a cure for a certain type of cancer, and I need money from the government to research it. And the government under Biden said, yeah, we can do that. However, as part of your grant, you need to hire DEI, and you need to show how this is going to work into our political frame of thinking. Is that basically how that works?
That's basically it. And the irony now is that a lot of scientists who would have preferred not to do this, they would have preferred just to research how to cure cancer or 100 other things. Now they're seeing a lot of their grants canceled by the Trump administration, which is just seeing, oh, you have the DEI words, we're going to cancel your grant. And most of those scientists would have preferred never to put it in there. But
so they didn't want DEI in the first place. They wanted to say, I want to work on this scientific thing. I want to work on this cancer gene that I'm working on.
And it's also, it's very dismissive of minorities. Anna Krylov points out in her article a number of black scientists who signed on.
You keep dropping names that I don't know.
Yeah, Anna Krylov is a chemist at the University of Southern California, also in her youth a refugee from the Soviet Union. And she's been warning for years that American universities are becoming, in some ways, more like Soviet universities. And she's proven prescient on that. A lot of minority chemists and scientists have said, look, I don't want to be lumped in there. I just want to do my work as a chemist or a biologist or a physicist.
You would think, particularly in those hard sciences, because oppressor viewpoints don't matter when you're looking at molecules that I know of. I don't.
The state of California disagrees with you. They have, and people involved in the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression have written some funny stuff on this. Everybody focuses on the Stop Woke Act in Florida, parts of which were problematic, and the state of Florida got sued and pulled back correctly. California has required diversity, equity, and inclusion rules for college teaching that mean on the junior college level and even some of the universities, you have to incorporate DEI into everything you're doing. A bunch of faculty are suing, as one community college chemistry professor put it, how exactly do I put DEI in the chemical formula for boron? It doesn't work, right? This is just laughable. But these are very serious regulations. California, until recently, 7 of their 8 state universities required a DEI statement. Those have been very non-transparent, but we did find out what Berkeley was doing with one hard science position, and roughly 80% of the applicants were screened out by having insufficient DEI statements before they looked at whether they were good scientists.
I want to check that again.
Yeah.
You're telling me that at Berkeley, 80% of the applicants for a research project, research funding,
for a faculty position, faculty teaching and research position,
they were screened out because they didn't meet DEI requirements?
They,
Like
they,
what?
did, they did not have a statement.
Oh, they didn't have a statement.
This was a required statement. We used to call them in the McCarthy-era a loyalty oath. In the old days, you'd have to sign a loyalty oath. If you were teaching chemistry or whatever, you'd have to sign a loyalty oath that you were loyal to the U.S. and you weren't under communist discipline. That was a terrible idea. Nowadays, at many universities, you have to sign a loyalty oath to diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a bad idea.
Let's pull off the highway for a second on that one.
Right.
Hollywood has a fixation with McCarthyism.
Yeah.
It has been the opposite of celebrated, but it has been made famous in movie after movie after movie after movie.
And rightfully so. Yeah.
Yeah, and that this was such it crippled free speech. It crippled creativity. The Trumbo fountain up in CU, the Dalton Trumbo, and look, these people had to go underground to do their art. And
the front, they'd have fronts writing for them. Yeah.
Right, and we understand how awful that was. You're telling me it's pretty much the exact same thing here. That here are 80% of the people who applied didn't sign the DEI loyalty oath,
right?
And therefore their application was nope.
It's actually worse now, and the reason why I say it's worse now is that in the McCarthy era, people all knew what the rules were and they could comply, and they pretty much did. Now the rules keep changing every minute. That's a huge problem. A second problem, though, is that Greg Lukianoff at FIRE, Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, he's the president of them. He has a chapter in here pointing out that it appears, although the numbers are hard to track down, it appears that more professors have been fired for ideological reasons in the last 10 years than in the whole of the McCarthy era. We also have a chapter on self-censorship in society. And there's actually comparative data stretching back to 1950. 3.5 times more Americans now report self-censoring than at the height of the McCarthy era. That's a tragedy. Roughly half of Americans now report that, yeah, I self-censor because I could get in trouble if I said the wrong thing. Now, if Americans were horrible people who wanted to, run down the hall yelling the N-word or yelling kill the police, I'd be glad they were self-censoring, right? But that's not where we are. People are self-censoring over things like saying, I think biological sex is a real and useful concept, right? Or I think that most police are not oppressing black people. Most of them are kind of doing their jobs, and things like that, which are certainly things that if universities are going to be places where we get to research and explore a lot of ideas, people need to be free to say those things, or at least propose them as ideas.
The cancel culture has finally had some words around it. We have felt exactly what you said. Every student, every employee, everyone who's been sent to HR for using the wrong term, quite innocently, understands I have to toe a line I might not agree with.
Right.
And I find that so very offensive. It was offensive in the McCarthy years. It's offensive now. For me, for that person, and I go off on this and I probably should stop, but when somebody looks at a biological male and he's told, no, you must refer to that person as a female, to them it's lying. Yeah. And to keep your job, you must lie. Right. And your mind is like, this is Orwellian. 2 + 2 = 4. I've got to say that. Right. And if I say it enough, the plan is I'll end up believing it. And it's ugly, just like McCarthyism was ugly, that you have to, what does McCarthy have to do with my research on cancer? Nothing. All right.
There's a second problem that's related. In the McCarthy era, not always, unfortunately, but very often, people would be supported by their institutions. Nowadays, the institutions and even often the students are and sometimes your fellow faculty are part of the problem. So
they're the lynchmen. They're the henchmen. They're the guys out there with the axes going, you know what he said? You know what the modern term would be Karens, but they're like, what he said? He said something that offended this micro group, and therefore it's
and
bad.
there's an even bigger problem, which is and Dwight Eisenhower actually predicted this in his farewell address. He said, when universities become dependent on federal funds and federal regulations, they're going to have to reflect the reviews of whatever a given regime is. And the danger is they'll prioritize that funding over teaching students and over intellectual curiosity. And he was absolutely right. was a bright guy. He was actually president of Columbia before he was president of the U.S., Columbia University, not the country. He kind of understood how these things work.
He also understood, the military-industrial complex.
That came out. That was the military-industrial complex speech. He had 2 paragraphs in universities, and he diagnosed the problem before it was a problem.
All which is different branches of the same tree of government making decisions, and people follow the money.
Right.
Before that, research was largely funded by private sector enterprises, either grant-giving organizations or god-awful evil corporations. Maybe a drug company wanted research done on this.
We also did it far more cheaply back then. There were very few compliance requirements. So I tell my students this. I think my dissertation, which I did in 1989, cost about, if you don't count my sweat equity, I think it cost about $1,000, so maybe $3,000 today. And I got 2 major books and a dozen articles out of it. Nowadays, the compliance requirements, going through the Institutional Review Board, doing the paperwork to get the grants, all that, it's a very different world now. Anna Krylov, the person I talked about, the Soviet immigrant, she said when she first came to this country, her first NSF grant, which as I recall she got in 1979, she had to do 3 pages of paperwork. Now you have to have a team of 2 or 3 assistants working on these things for weeks. It's crazy, and one of the things it means is that unless you're at a major university with a lot of resources, you won't be able to necessarily do the most highfalutin research.
I see that everywhere, also in business, that small businesses can't afford to do compliance. And compliance, and just you will comply. It really is Stalinistic stuff that you will make sure that you follow the procedures that push our outcome. All right, in comes Trump. And chatting before, I love Gulf of America. I was so tickled by Gulf of America. It's stupid.
Right.
It is.
It's very stupid.
It's stupid. It's obnoxious. Right. It is to push a political point of view, not because the tradition went that way. And the left is having conniptions. I'm never going to go. And I think, really, talk to me about Mount Blue Sky here in Colorado, formerly Mount Evans, and all the other really Soviet-like renaming of things for political purposes. It's like, no. We didn't start this ridiculous fight of canceling names and changing names and knocking down statues and doing this. You don't like Gulf of America? You don't like Gulf of America? That's what it feels like. And I found it, I would have hated Gulf of America, but I finally feel a little, this is what it feels like. This is what you have done for us for decades now, and you just got a tiny little taste of Gulf of America and Mount McKinley. Shove it.
It is unfortunately a fair critique. My progressive friend Musa El-Garbi wrote a wonderful book called We Have Never Been Woke. It was just out last year. And a lot of the thesis of the book is colleges and universities are producing too many people who want to be elites and think they should be elites. So even though a lot of them shouldn't be. So there's immense competition among elites for a small number of positions. And so one of the things they do is they invent new languages, and then they knock off other people for not using the right language. So if you don't say Latinx, you get in trouble. But guess what?
By the way, I've got a lot of Hispanic friends. They all despise that label.
Well, they must be part of the 97% because surveys show that only 3 to 4% of Hispanics like the term Latinx. They think it's horrible. As one reporter said, it sounds like a porn star, right? It's awful. The Hispanics do not want to be called this. This is just a crazy thing invented by woke whites with PhDs, right? Who are saying I'm more politically correct than you are. It's awful.
Let me give you my pet peeve is person first descriptions. So my son has Down syndrome. So I've got this Downs kid. I do not have a Downs kid. Oh my God, heaven forbid that I have a Downs kid. I have a child with Downs or with Down syndrome, which is now he cannot be retarded, which used to be the medical term. He was developmentally delayed, and now he is neurodivergent.
Right. We change the terms about every 4 years.
Yeah.
And every 4 years, people want to say, look at me, I have this new term that's better, so give me a grant, right?
Right.
And hire
if you
me and
don't-
not the other guy.
But if you don't use the term,
Right.
you are seen as mean,
Right.
ignorant, or racist. That's it.
Right.
Here they are. You're just a bad person, you're a racist, or you're stupid.
It's a way that upper class people put down lower class people, right? Very, very few working class people, including working class minorities, embrace this language. It's a silly language. And it's one of the reasons why Trump actually, I'm not a Trump fan, but it's one of the reasons why he did better among minority voters and worse among white voters than any Republican in probably 25 years. He did even a little better among Hispanics than George W. Bush did, who spoke Spanish, who was very comfortable with Mexican Americans. I think this is a key reason why blacks, whites, and Hispanics and Asian Americans all agree that wokeness has gone way too far. And the election last year, that was part of what it was about.
So a couple of things. The person first thing, in the Spanish language, you have the modifier after the noun.
Yeah.
It is a beer cold. Yeah. Here it is a cold beer, except when we want to do a person of color, and that thing has just gone everywhere. Right.
And people of color think it's a flaky term.
Right. And so now it's you can't even do transgender person. Is it supposed to be a person of trans? There's no consistency. Right. All of it is this verbal obstacle course you have to navigate. Otherwise, you are declared racist, right, ignorant, hateful.
And there are consultants who make a lot of money off of selling this.
Right. Something amazing happened when Trump was elected. All of a sudden, what people were whispering, in the background, I don't want to call that man a woman. That's lying to me. Or the they them thing. I cannot talk to a single person and call them a plural. My brain doesn't work because I'm old and ignorant and hateful and all the rest. And so when they say they've got a cold, it's like, who has a cold? That individual has a cold, or that couple is sharing a cold? I don't know what you are talking about. Right. As soon as Trump won, that sea that was behind the who were too scared to talk seemed now to be willing to talk, saying, I've had enough. It was right there. We all knew it. Right. But there was no permission slip to say it publicly until he won the popular vote. Yeah. I think that broke a wall.
Temporarily.
So talk to me about that, because I find that fascinating.
I think there are powerful interests in academia and in the bureaucracy. I mean, I'm not anti-bureaucracy. My dad was a federal worker. I was a federal worker for a while. My son worked for a defense agency for a while. I don't hate bureaucracy, but bureaucracy is not about free thought. Bureaucracy is about compliance. And a huge problem we have, actually used to support DEI, and I still support some aspects of it.
Of what?
Of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But the analogy I like to make is, I study policing, among other things, something that actually matters to people of color quite a bit, and we don't really study it much, unfortunately. New York City is actually a remarkably safe city. Republicans don't want to admit that, but it's true. It's sixth safest city out of the 50 largest in America. And if you control for poverty, it's the safest city. And it's 8.5 million New Yorkers patrolled by about 37,000 NYPD cops. But suppose instead of 37,000 cops, New York had 300,000. It would be a disaster. New York would be a police state. It's just the nature of things. If you have too many people doing these jobs, they take more and more power. And that's sort of what's happened with DEI. What used to be a small office that was there to try to prevent real instances of discrimination, and there were and are some, morphed into something huge that everyone was afraid of.
Discrimination.
Yes.
It was something that said, we are pushing our brand of preferred discrimination. Right. And under the oppressor model, it's like, and we need to make up for past sins. So now it's your turn to be under it. A
great example, and you couldn't have done this research at a university. It would have been too controversial. At least I wouldn't have. And I'm a fairly bold guy. Jay Green, and my former colleague and former student James Paul, did a fascinating study. They looked at tweets from about 900 DEI officers. And they found that they tweet a lot about China, and they tweet even more about Israel, even though Israel is way smaller than China. And interestingly, and Both countries kill Muslims. China actually kills far more, I'd say with far less reason. Interestingly, the tweets about China were 62% positive. The tweets about Israel were 96% negative. There's an ideology of oppressor-oppressed. Jews are considered oppressors. That's crazy.
It's mind-boggling.
Right? It's crazy, right? Given you Jewish history, it's especially mind-boggling.
There are 15 million Jews on the globe.
Yes.
And they've been nearly wiped out several times.
Yes.
This is not, but still.
I mean, they do tend to succeed in the professions, but that's not a plot. It's because they spend more time studying, right? As do Chinese Americans, as do actually Nigerian Americans of the Igbo tribe, do quite well. This isn't some Jewish plot or something, right? Columbia University, I'm not entirely happy with everything the Trump administration's done on this, but they have a very serious problem with anti-Semitism. Don't believe me, read their own internal report, which is online. Hundreds of examples of really severe harassment, including kicking kids off teams and things like that. Columbia was not going to deal with that.
Stop there for a second. What I love is Trump's a fascist.
In some ways.
Trump is a Nazi.
Right.
Yet, I thought Nazis were the ones that wanted to kick the Jews off the teams and out of college.
Right.
But it's the people who are calling him a Nazi that are actually doing all this anti-Semitic stuff. I am so confused.
It's a complicated world.
Talk to me a little bit about the book, the Free Inquiry Papers. Yeah. It's put out by American Enterprise Institute. I want to ask you about that first. Why AEI, a think tank? You are a professor. Your co-authors are professors. This is academic stuff. Why isn't it on some academic? Why isn't it on a university press?
Me and my collaborators, who are very significant researchers, Sally Satel at Yale, Lee Jussum is one of the most cited psychologists in the country right now. He's at Rutgers. I'm pretty well cited at the University of Arkansas. Catherine Salmon is a leading sex researcher. A lot of sex researchers actually are involved in this because sex researchers are constantly canceled and censored. 30 years back, it was from the right. Now it's almost all from the left.
How so?
And they get death threats. They get a lot of death threats.
Give me a definition. Sex researcher. Yeah. Trust me, I'm a sex researcher, and I haven't been too successful. So what do you mean, sex researcher?
People who study, usually psychologists, sometimes doctors, who study sex, in particular the sex act, they tend to have these ideas anchored in evolution and anchored in thousands of years of tradition and over 100 years of scientific research, that physical sex is binary. That doesn't mean there aren't some trans people. There are, and we should certainly respect them. But essentially, sex is a binary biological thing based on chromosomes that leads to all kinds of other things, including performance in sports, and very different strategies towards mating and all kinds of things. If you write about that, you will deeply offend, you certainly won't offend most gay people or lesbian people, you certainly won't offend most trans people, but you will offend trans activists, and you will probably offend your own DEI office. And so people doing this kind of research very often are investigated. There have been more than a few death threats. Alice Dreger, in her very good book, Galileo's Middle Finger, has a whole chapter on sort of death threats to sex researchers, including a friend of mine.
I had no idea.
This gets no press, and it really should. We can't have a reasoned discussion about how to incorporate trans people, which I think in a lot of ways we should, and what to do and what not to do, unless we can have a reasoned discussion where different points of view, including the points of view of biologists, come into play.
I live in Boulder, where everyone has to emote how elite they are and how wonderful and diverse they are. And so I see a lot of, in this home, we believe signs. We believe love is love. And science is real, except if it comes to chromosomes.
Right.
So what they're trying to say is climate science is real.
They're ignoring more than 100 years of biological research.
So, but chromosome science is not real.
Right.
And again, I'm wondering how someone's brain can do the mental ping pong to make both of those statements work. And you're telling me those people who do research have been canceled.
Yes, and threatened, yes. There was a wonderful conference actually held by Anna Krylov, the Soviet immigrant at USC, University of Southern California, in January, called the Censorship and the Science Conferences. And there were some chilling presentations. It's all on YouTube. You can look it up. One by Michael Bailey, who described a friend of mine who described the death threats he had gotten as a sex researcher, and to some degree his family had gotten. There's a really very sad presentation by Carol Hooven, who for 20 years taught courses on sexuality at Harvard, award-winning instructor, wrote a best-selling book on testosterone, which got her in big trouble. Talking about those differences led a few people who were not trans, interestingly, to claim that she had created somehow an unsafe environment for trans people and their supporters. And the Harvard president who defended people who were saying kill the Jews under her regime, Carol Hooven, was harassed out of Harvard. Right? The hypocrisy is mind-boggling.
And I had the conversation with a professor up at CU who did some climate studies and said, no, the damage is not nearly as big as some other research says, and he was pressured off. So it was,
He's at a think tank now, yeah.
He's at Manhattan?
I think he's at Manhattan, and one of his chief co-authors is going to the University of Wyoming.
Right. It's just, and that, my old question
They presented at the same conference, by the way, yeah.
my question is always, what happened to good liberals? I remember, that phrases like, I disagree with what you say, I defend to my death your right to say it. I remember things like the ends don't justify the means, and now all that is gone. And so now that, I want to finish the story.
I'm going to push back. Most of the contributors to this book are good liberals. I would.
I want to finish the story on this.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you didn't go with a publisher that was a university press.
Right. We tried to. We tried to. We have a very esteemed group of authors and co-editors. One press said directly, and another sort of hinted at it, their own staffs no longer support free inquiry. Younger people in publishing often see free inquiry and free speech as somehow white supremacist, which is absurd. I mean, every civil rights group in history has relied on free speech, usually as the only power they had. It's why Martin Luther King, Frederick Douglass, the early pro-gay rights people in the 50s and 60s, they were all lions for free speech. We have a wonderful chapter by John Zimmerman, a good liberal, I might add, at University of Pennsylvania, about how that's true. But many liberals today have forgotten that history, or they still believe in it, but they're terrified that their own bureaucrats or their own students will get them in trouble. So a lot of it's fair.
Again, this is what you found in Nazi-controlled Germany, what you found in the Soviet Union, which is, I'd like to say what I want to say, but it's not worth me losing my livelihood. In those cases, my life.
Your life. Two of the best chapters are about the Soviet Union, one by Anna Krylov, one by Lee Jussum and Catherine Salmon. They're about largely Lysenkoism, which Lysenko was a botanist in the Soviet Union who had crazy theories that essentially that plant genetics don't matter. And the West was wrong on this, Mendelian genetics was wrong, and that you could teach plants to do almost anything. Siberia, you could grow orange trees, etc. Stalin liked this ideologically. So people who disagreed with Lysenko over a 20-year period were fired and often killed. And it set Soviet agriculture back decades. And
because
there were mass famines.
Nobody could challenge the stupidity of his theory for fear of being killed.
And then Mao did
we're not there yet.
We're not there yet.
But we are close to there.
We are moving in that direction. Mao did the same thing, by the way, These are disastrous.
We're close to there because instead of their lives, you're holding their livelihood.
Right.
You're holding that you will be canceled in the world of academia and you'll never get a job. And you're going to work slinging French fries. All right, you didn't answer why AEI.
Why AEI? We have, after being turned down by a couple university presses, we got actually a pretty good offer from, an okay offer from a fairly good academic press, Lexington, which I'm happy to say Lexington does publish a wide range of things, which is good for them. But AEI made us a better offer. AEI said, we'll publish it paperback. We'll have an event for you in Washington, which we did last week. You can look at it online. And so we really had to go with AEI. But
Which is American Enterprise Institute,
right. But when
which is a center-right organization.
Center-right organization. But when we went with AEI, 4 of our authors pulled out because they said for reputational reasons it would hurt them at their universities or prospective universities. One was a consultant if they published something with AEI. That's really problematic.
That is jaw-dropping. It is so insulting.
No, it's how the world works now.
No.
We have to undo that world.
It can't be. So here, there are people, 4 authors. So you would have had 8. There are 4 authors I see here.
Co-editors. Yeah, these are chapter authors, yeah.
But you would have had another 4 authors.
Yeah.
But they said, no. If they publish me, it will hurt my livelihood. It will hurt my chances for advancement. Even though the words I say, I'm willing to stand behind.
Right. That's very, very common now.
How is anyone not offended by that? Explain to me this critical thinking, critical theory. This critical theory idea that that's okay.
I mean, my friend John McWhorter argues it's sort of a religion, that people really believe in this. And if you're a hardcore religious zealot, you've found truth. And anyone who questions truth, obviously, you want to censor them because only bad can come from publishing errors. But my view is if you're convinced you found truth, you shouldn't be a professor. You shouldn't be an academic publisher. You should, go out and preach in a church, right? Preach in a synagogue or mosque. It's a different job. It's an important job, but it's a different job. Our job, we're supposed to say that maybe I haven't found truth, right? Maybe my ideas are good, maybe they're bad. Let's test my ideas and figure out if they're good or bad. That's completely different than a religious zealot job. But unfortunately, as John McWhorter puts it, much of academia and much of academic publishing and parts of the news media have been taken over by hardcore religious fanatics.
Going to college in the 80s, I remember the hatred of the moral majority, of those hardcore Christians that wanted to ban pornography, wanted to get a set of what's on television, and they wanted this stuff stopped. And then all of a sudden the left came to the defense of guys like Larry Flint, who had a skin rag called Hustler. And
he's kind of a jackass too.
He was a real jerk, and he put out truly misogynistic stuff. And so, but you had these people saying, we need to defend him. Right. I remember during Bush the first, there was a law to ban burning of the flag. And the left came out and said, no, you can't do that. And I'm wondering what changed there, that instead of defending free speech, or free inquiry, these are the people now using the exact same tactics of McCarthy and the moral majority and Jerry Falwell and the others who wanted to say, we know what's right for me, so it's going to be right for you. And if you go against it, it's mafia tactics. Tell me how that changed on a college campus. Why did it go from we celebrate free speech, we celebrate free inquiry, to we denounce it?
I think ideological change, especially among younger people, young people, students 30 years ago, students coming out of K-12, were likely to have some familiarity with the First Amendment. Now they don't. And they don't realize that American heritage is, for the most part, pretty cool. They've been taught to teach America as a racist country, which is true, but literally every country on earth is racist. That we have some racism isn't what makes us unique. What makes us unique are things like the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, 200-odd years of peaceful transfers of power across party lines. We stopped teaching people that part of our heritage, so they don't think about how to protect it. They just say, oh, well, that speech sounds bad. Let's stop it. They can't stop a second and think and say, wait, maybe to somebody else my speech might sound bad, right? A lot of speech that nowadays, Martin Luther King was widely censored. His speech was considered potentially dangerous. It could cause riots. I don't think it ever did, but people feared it could, right? We don't teach that history. We also have bigger bureaucracies now, and again, bureaucracies are about compliance. They're not about free speech. I actually kind of like President Obama in many ways, but this was a terrible thing he did. The Obama era Title IX rules that had an incredibly wide definition of unsafe climate. So if I criticized the investigation of another professor, I could be accused of having an unsafe climate and, be involved in a bureaucratic star chamber for 9 months where I didn't even have a right to have an attorney, or even being told what I was charged with. In the Obama era, we got the rise of hotlines where you could anonymously report people for alleged racism, sexism, or ableism. That's a disaster, right? That's leaving the door open for people to say, oh, I'm a rival for that guy over there for promotion. I'm going to report him as ableist, right? It was a total disaster, but it happened in the Obama years. We're still stuck with it. I hope that the Trump administration has some success in dismantling a lot of these bureaucracies, but they become part of the scene. We really need to teach people about the importance of the First Amendment. And it's the only way we can all get along. If we're spending all our time censoring each other, it's going to be a prelude to a civil war or something like that. We can't keep going down this road. And it would be easy. I look at the protests against Israel on major college campuses, which one thing that's clear is that most people protesting know nothing about the Middle East, right? Nothing about it. They have no idea.
They've been taught the oppressed oppressor viewpoint, which is only recent.
They have no idea that there are 1.8 million Muslims living in Israel with something pretty close to the full rights of citizenship. Many of them are doctors, actually. A lot of them go to the medical field. And they're not looking to leave Israel either, and they're able to practice their religion. There are only now about 6,000 Jews in the entire Arab world, plus Persia. There were 600,000 60 years ago. They all had to flee, or they would have been killed. People have no idea that, yes, Israel has killed a lot of Palestinians, sometimes probably improperly, but so has each of the surrounding countries. The Middle East is a very rough place. Israel has a relatively good record in that very rough place. People protesting have no idea of this because people who would point it out to them are not being hired at universities. If you have this view, it's going to be hard for you to get a job in a lot of the social sciences, certainly Middle East studies. But a second thing is university administrators have no idea how to impose free speech rules fairly. The American Association of University Professors, which used to push this, doesn't anymore. It doesn't protect speech in the center and right, only in the left. Increasingly, the American Civil Liberties Union does not protect speech on the right or center, only on the left. Luckily, new organizations are rising. The Academic Freedom Alliance is very important. There's one whole group just at Harvard, the Harvard Council on Free Speech, or on Free Inquiry. The BEST, Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, which has thousands of members and sues universities a lot. And what their leader, Greg Lukianoff, says again and again, he says, look, people at universities, we should allow free speech, including horrible speech. Say, kill the Zionists and kill the Jews. Unless it's at a specific person, you get to do that. But you also get to criticize those views. You also get to explain why those views are wrong. And you do not get to harass people. You do not get to follow them around and yell at them or kick them off the dance team or give them a bad grade in a course because they're Jewish or they're Israelis. You do not get to harass people. Presidents of elite universities have forgotten that. There are exceptions. Vanderbilt is a big exception. Dartmouth is a big exception. And a lot of the second-tier universities like mine, if my university chancellor was called before Congress, he does support free speech. He's a first-rate historian and actually not a bad leader. He could say, look, yeah, we allow some obnoxious speech on the left. Guess what? We've also allowed some obnoxious speech on the right that a lot of our faculty would be uncomfortable with, and here are some examples. We support free speech. We don't allow harassment, but we support free speech. That shouldn't be that hard for the presidents of Harvard, Penn, and MIT to understand, and yet they don't. That's bizarre, right? That's truly bizarre. How did we get here?
It's illiberal.
Yes.
And it's a term that we need to become familiar with.
Right.
It is illiberal. And so the idea of going to get a liberal arts education, and by the way, the word liberal was co-opted. And I'm a liberal. Mm-hmm. I'm not a communist. Right. I'm a classic liberal.
Meaning you want people to do their own thing, right, unless there's a really good reason to tell them not to.
People want to get the book. Where do they do it?
It's on Target. It's on Amazon, places like that. If you want the
It's called the Free Inquiry Papers.
And if you want the short version, American Enterprise Institute has this, the Free Inquiry Papers, How to Bring Back Free Inquiry, with our 3 pages of recommendations.
Just 3 pages. Now, this is what you academics, you're gonna, I'm going to take your class, you're going to make me buy this book when I could have learned everything out of this.
I am not making my students buy that, but yeah.
What is that scam? Someday we're going to get to the bottom of it.
Right.
Bob, great seeing you again. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, I so much enjoyed it.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.